All right, we're live, everybody. Welcome, one and all, to the Movie Mass live film commentary for the 2001 classic film, Wet Hot American Summer. Everybody, this is one that I've been looking forward to doing for a while. Obviously, I had to wait until August the 18th to do this one because, as you'll see in the very opening credits, this film takes place on August the 18th. And for me to premiere this commentary and hold this live commentary on any other date would be sacrilege. I know you're on Patreon. Maybe you're watching this not on August the 18th. I don't know. Maybe you're watching this in December. That's fine. I mean, whenever it's convenient for you. I'm glad that you're watching, regardless of when you watch. But of course, just for my own sake of weird vanity, I just have to do it on the day. I wouldn't be able to do this commentary in December. In fact, this is a film that I watch probably every single year. This is an annual viewing for me, but I never watch this film outside of the summertime. I almost always watch it in August. I don't always watch it on August 18th. I'm not that weird. Like, I'm a little weird, but I'm not that weird. So I'll watch it in August, though. I mean, I'm not going to bust it out in October. Just like I'm not busting out Hocus Pocus in March, right? That's a Halloween movie. I'm only fucking with that movie in the latter half of October. I'm sure some of you guys out there are similar. I'm sure you don't watch Christmas movies in July. I just take it a little bit further. And so I'm a little particular about when I watch certain movies. But again, Wet Hot American Summer is, at least in my mind, a undisputed classic. It is a film that is almost beyond reproach. I think, it's hard to describe any film as perfect, but I think that in a lot of ways, Wet Hot American Summer gets closer than most films do to a level of sublime perfection that I think, it may not be high art. I don't think I'm going to argue that case at any point during this commentary. You'll note this is a movie mass commentary, so this is going to be, a mostly reverent commentary towards a film that I hold near and dear to my heart, and that I do feel like is worthy of like a legitimate, bona fide film respect. I do believe that this film deserves to stand with other, at least with other classic comedies. It may not stand with Citizen Kane, Rules of the Game, uh Kurosawa films like Rashomon, but I do think that this film deserves a place, which for comedies I think is kind of a rarefied air. I mean, I think you've got guys like Wes Anderson that pump out comedies like Rushmore and the Royal Tenenbaums. I mean, we're all familiar with The Life Aquatic and all the various films that Wes Anderson has done, and he seems to be pretty prolific. I mean, it seems like Wes Anderson's putting something out every second or third year. The guy hasn't taken a ton of time off, and all of his films tend to be fairly well received. They may not be widely consumed like some comedies are, but his comedies are kind of that rare comedy that fits that snobbish Criterion collection standard of excellence, of like it's a comedy film, but there's also enough artistically going on that we can discuss this film with other accepted film classics. But I think Wet Hot American Summer, particularly as time has gone on, I think it has had an incredible staying power in terms of popularity, and I think that it has really carved out for itself a tremendous cult following. But I think, like many other movies, particularly a ton of those in the Criterion collection, it's not like it had some huge box office presence the way a Marvel movie of 5 or 6 or 7 years ago would have had. Infinity War or Endgame or something like that had this, billion-dollar box office presence. And I don't think anybody is discussing, I mean, as enjoyable as those films are, I don't think anybody is holding up Infinity War or Endgame as high art. A lot of art goes in. I mean, undoubtedly a lot of particularly the CG, the artistry behind the actual production of this thing. But with Wet Hot American Summer, again, I think it's obviously not comparable to a big budget film, and it did not perform very well at the box office. I believe this film cost only a couple of $1 million to make. I think it was less than a $2 million budget. And that's with names like Paul Rudd, Elizabeth Banks, Janine Garofalo, David Hyde Pierce. They're not as big now as maybe they were in 2001 when this film premiered. Molly Shannon. I think it's actually kind of fun as we watch this movie to talk about kind of which stars have risen and which stars have kind of fallen since '01, because it's definitely a different landscape nowadays. And the fact that they made this film for under $2 million with fucking Bradley Cooper in it. This guy wins Academy Awards nowadays, and Paul Rudd makes Ant-Man movies and the aforementioned Endgame. See, there's our connection with Wet Hot American Summer and the Avengers films. We have the Paul Rudd connection. So it's really, it's a film that you can't believe they made it for what they made it for, but they just hit all of those stars way early before Bradley Cooper this is his first film. And obviously before the MCU was doing things with Paul Rudd. So they were able to make the film on an absolute shoestring budget, but even as cheaply as they made it, it did not perform at the box office like it needed to. But it has found a lot of, I think, maybe even financial profit in the home video market. I mean, this was released to DVD, I don't know, probably sometime in 2002. I didn't do my research, and I don't know the date that this DVD was first released. That was about the time that I saw it. I think I saw it in like '03. And, it's a movie that did not recoup its money at the box office, but I believe that over the intervening 20 or so years since its release, it's sold plenty of DVDs, Blu-rays. I mean, they wouldn't have brought it back as a limited series on Netflix for those two seasons if they didn't think it was going to make at least some money. And so I think this film has had a good cultural impact despite its box office being kind of light. And I got a lot to say lovingly about this film, but I'll do so as we're watching it together. Now, again, this commentary is going to be in addition to the commentaries that you'll find on the standard Blu-ray. If you were to order the Blu-ray off of Amazon today, you would find a commentary track on that disc with a commentary by the director David Wayne, co-writer, and the co-writer and star, or one of the stars, Michael Showalter, along with Janine Garofalo. The three of them provide a commentary track for the film that is very enjoyable. It's nice to hear their thoughts on the various scenes and how they came together. And what really amounts to is an awful lot of trivia, which for fans of this film, no doubt you want that trivia. You want to know what the filmmakers have to say about the film, because it's very relevant to our interests. I would encourage you very much to buy that Blu-ray if you haven't already, and I would encourage you to watch that the film with that commentary track playing for the audio. This commentary track, I'm going to try my very best to not provide trivia, because you can already get that from Wikipedia. You can already get that from Reddit. You can already get that from the commentary track I just mentioned that comes with the disc. You certainly don't need to become a member of my Patreon to get more trivia or to hear me repeat the trivia that I recall from listening to the commentary track myself with Wayne and Showalter. So I'm going to try to give a different experience from the standpoint of a fan, but also the standpoint of a fan who has a degree in film theory. So hopefully I'll be able to provide something that's a little bit beyond just trivial. But let's get started on the movie. This is a good one, and I don't want to take up more time than is absolutely necessary to introduce this thing. I have to say, I love the way they start out. I mean, this is a period piece. This is set in 1981, as you'll see from one of the opening titles. And so, by and large, they use music that is contemporaneous with when this is occurring. And here we got Jane by Starship. Holy shit. I mean, what a fucking song. That's a great song. So, you get that playing over the scene of kind of just giving you a brief introduction to the characters. Here are all the characters that we're going to meet in the film, and we just get to kind of see them. We get this opening montage that is, it's set to contemporaneous music. It tells us kind of when this is taking place. The way the characters are dressed as well. I mean, you can tell wardrobe did actually put in some effort to put these characters into outfits. So, the information that we're getting from this is setting a vibe for us, telling us that this is going to be a comedy film. It's obviously a camp environment, but the counselors are all kind of like young people cutting loose. There's sexual tension, etc. There's comedy, and it's telling us also that this is taking place in late 70s, early 80s. 81 is the truth, but we haven't even seen that date yet, right? That title has not come up yet, but we can tell by the music, by the party and the beers they're drinking. This is taking place in August 18th of 1981. 81, coincidentally, the year I was born. Was not born yet. I was born about 3 weeks after this film takes place in 81, and it's a different era. I don't especially remember much of 1981 or any of it. Um, and I think as much as this film is is really kind of a ludicrous film. I mean, it's really very over the top in terms of its antics. It's almost like a live action Looney Tunes cartoon. The violence isn't quite as like slapstick, but there is one or two instances, and I'll point those out when we get there, of some almost Looney Tunes esque kind of violence. But it's just really an absurdist type of comedy. And I think if you're into that, then this film is like very high on your list. I think for people who are not as into the absurdist humor, this might be a little bit more polarizing of a film in that regard. Than something like 40-Year-Old Virgin, which is kind of a close to this time frame of release. Um, so as absurdist as this film is, it's still kind of this loving. It still takes this loving treatment of summer camp and of like the kids and counselors. And I know they're all kind of silly caricatures. They're not all very well fleshed out and three-dimensional, and they're all fairly absurd. And there's a lot of absurd things that happen during this film that make no sense and would not happen in any type of real life situation. But nonetheless, there is still at the core of this film a very loving treatment of the characters, even though they're like odd goofballs. They're all good people. I mean, there's no real like bad guy. I mean, when you realize that this film is kind of like a movie without I don't know, it doesn't have that like the villainy, the antagonist. I mean, there's antagonism between some of the characters, but it really is more about that like interpersonal dynamic. And I feel like just with their like loving attention to the period music, and there are some anachronisms, don't get me wrong. They fuck up and they use some music that wasn't released till 1983, a little bit later in the film. But I think it's still kind of a loving approach to summer camp. It feels, I think, for a lot of people who have spent time in their youth at summer camps, it feels like a very nostalgic film, and it does for me. I mean, I think that's one spot where I do enjoy the absurdist humor. We have this voiceover here. That's the beekeeper. He's the would-be radio host for the Camp Firewood state of the art radio station. State of the art for 1981, guys. But he's kind of like the glue that holds this together. I mean, voiceover narration in most films kind of sucks, but in this film, he's sort of the glue that holds these disparate scenes together with his somewhat sparse voiceover. I'm glad we don't get a ton from him, but he does really kind of become the thread that sort of holds all of these. It's sort of a patchwork film, and it's sort of a loving, sort of takes like a loving look at the summer camp experience, and I think it's hard not to be somewhat charmed by that. I think when watching this film, especially if you can look back on like a summer camp experience in your own life and think like, yeah, I mean, it may not be identical to this. We didn't have a talking can of vegetables telling me it can suck its own dick, but nonetheless, it still kind of looks and feels like a legit summer camp experience. And so, it's actually a really pretty interesting thing that they've got a little interesting dynamic that they've got going on. I appreciate that beekeeper voiceover narration. Again, it's pretty light. Otherwise, the film really does feel kind of disconnected. They they got some silly stuff like that. Like they open the film up with some silly stuff, and it's it's kind of dumb. But I think the main conceit of this film that's really pretty stupid is that all of this stuff takes place over the course of a single day. And they'll remind you of that with the titles. They'll remind you of that. Every few minutes as they cut between scenes, they'll have those intertitles that'll say what time it is. And it's an entire summer's worth of bullshit. I don't know, a 2-week summer camp. If you were at summer camp for 2 weeks, you probably wouldn't accomplish half of what they do in a single day. But that's part of the fun, I think, is how absurd it is that they managed to get all of this stuff in. I mean, she's just now talking to David Hyde Pierce for the very first time. Apparently, she's been watching him all summer. They've been greeting each other with a wordless hello from across the camp for the entirety of the summer. But she finally got the balls to come up and talk to him. And for some reason, he hands her the shovel. And it's all very stupid. Like, that's not how people act in real life. That's not normal human behavior. She stuck out her hand. You shake her hand. You don't hand her the fucking shovel. But the idea that she's meeting him for the very first time just on the morning of the last day of camp. I mean, that's cool if you want to exchange numbers and get together for coffee 2 weeks later. If you live anywhere nearby, you can get in touch with coffee once camp is done, but you're probably not going to develop an entire relationship over the course of a single day. And yet those things happen quite a number of times in this film, that they they manage to hit it off, start dating, and then tomorrow morning they're pregnant. I hope you've seen this film before, by the way. I hope you're not watching this movie for the very first time while listening to this commentary, because you're probably not going to get as much from this commentary. And I'm going to spoil the fuck out of this movie. Hypothetically, Beth there is pregnant tomorrow morning. This time tomorrow, 24 hours, she'll be pregnant from intercourse she has not yet had, presumably. So I got to say the music in this film is pretty excellent. They use a lot of true period music, at least near of the period. I think Jane by Starship, the song that was playing during the intro, is one of the better rock tracks that they play. That was actually a legitimate rock track. I think that came out in 1979. I could be wrong about that. I'm not a huge historian of Starship. Okay. So don't get upset with me if I fuck that year up. It's close enough to 1979 that come on, this is not an episode of Jeopardy. I'm sorry. But, in 79, song comes out, it gets heavy airplay. It's probably still getting played on the radio when you're partying with your friends the night before the last day of camp in August of 1981. So now Gene here, one of my more favorite characters, and certainly one of the characters that I can relate to a little bit more in my old age, because it's harder to relate to the young kid. I mean, even if I was kind of nerdy like him and did wear glasses when I was that age, I didn't show up to dinner with underwear on my head or wear a fake cape like that at that age. But from the neck up, I might have looked a little bit like this kid when I was roughly that age. I still think Gene is the easier one for me to identify with. He's a little bit insane and highly inappropriate, maybe inappropriately aggressive. All of that pretty much describes me pretty well, unfortunately. Douchebag. So, they're giving you this pretty decent introduction to all the characters. I mean, no one's really well rounded out. I mean, this one is the camp slut. She's the camp. I hate to say that. I'm not shaming her in any way, guys, okay? Before you cancel your subscription to my Patreon, I'm not shaming her for being a slut, but she is kind of the camp hoe, and she really doesn't get a lot of we'll find out that her dad abused her. She was an orphan or some shit like that. She had daddy issues. It's not a part of the equation. We don't need to explore why she's a whore. There's no whoration exploration. We just we take it for granted. And with a lot of characters, we just have to take their characterizations for granted, even as madcap as they are. And so the movie is doing a good job of sort of setting up the characters in a film that's very character driven. It is kind of odd. It strikes me as kind of odd to say that like most of these characters are pretty flat characterizations that don't have a arc. They don't change. We don't get a lot of explanation for why they are the way they are. I mean, Gene, we find out he fought in Vietnam. I think right here is there's a little bit of expository dialogue that explains a little bit of Gene's past. I don't know if it's relevant or not, but I'll see if I can shut up here. In the pantry over this sink, right next to my bottle of dick cream. The idea is that Gene's character continuously makes these Freudian slips, like he's got dick cream, and people call him out on him a little bit. Particularly his assistant there will call him out and say, "Did you just say dick cream?" The idea is that if you got dick cream, it's nothing to be ashamed of. With Gene, I think, they sort of explained that he was traumatized because of his involvement in the Vietnam War, and that causes him to act in that aggressive way. But it still doesn't explain why he's got a bottle of dick cream. And it certainly doesn't explain how a can of vegetables begins talking to him. Although you'd be safe if you assumed that maybe it's just part of his PTSD. It's like part of his psychological break is that, of course, he imagines he's a crazy person. He imagines a can of vegetables talking. Here we see Bradley Cooper. I mean, and here's a great place for me to begin discussing. In 01, when this film came out, Bradley Cooper wasn't fucking dick. Nobody fucking knew Bradley Cooper. It's weird that 20 years later, nobody doesn't know Bradley Cooper. Everybody knows Bradley Cooper. Back then, nobody knew Bradley Cooper. I mean, honestly, for years, he was the dude from Wet Hot American Summer to me. I'm like, oh, yeah, the guy who played McKinley's boyfriend. I'm not even sure if I knew his character's name in Wet Hot American Summer for many years. When I'm watching this movie in 04, 05, 06, like, whatever. He's just a dude who gets butt fucked by McKinley later in the movie. Whatever, And then, you keep up with it, and he's in The Hangover. He blows up off the Hangover trilogy. Starts making more and more films, and here he is, Academy Award winner, or at least Academy Award nominee. I mean, he's rubbing elbows with Clint Eastwood, doing American Sniper, A Star Is Born, fucking doing the voice of Rocket Raccoon in Guardians of the Galaxy. There's another Marvel connection. Here we got Paul Rudd, and I mean, at the time when I'm watching this for the very first time, I recognize Paul Rudd as the guy from Clueless. And Halloween 6, I think it was. He was in a Halloween movie in the 90s, in the mid-ish, 97-ish, 96, 97. He was in Clueless in 1995 or something. And otherwise, it's like, oh, yeah, I know that guy, right? He was charming enough in Clueless. Nobody was rescuing Halloween 6 or whatever one that was. But now Paul Rudd, after this movie, of course, he goes on to do some more comedy work, particularly Judd Apatow films, where he gets a little bit more notoriety and recognition. He was in the aforementioned 40-Year-Old Virgin, where he played a supporting role, but nonetheless, a very memorable one. And of course, as an actor, he's very charming. He's played charming roles in a lot of. He made another movie here with David Wayne called Role Models several years later. So, the guy continued to work, and then he took the role in Ant-Man, and that's probably what blew him up to really like international, where like Chinese people in Beijing will recognize Paul Rudd's face because the 3 Ant-Man films and the Avengers movies were distributed over there. So, it's just really weird that in 01, the get in this film was Janine Garofalo, Molly Shannon, who was just coming off a hot run on SNL, quite popular for the SNL crowd, and then David Hyde Pierce, who had done Frasier, and obviously had been in one of the biggest sitcoms of the 90s with Frasier. So, those are your 3 stars in 01. Nobody's talking about Paul Rudd or Bradley Cooper. You're not seeing their names on the byline. But nowadays, I imagine when younger people younger than myself, maybe people Riley's age, shout out Plunge. If you're 20 or 22 or 23 right now, like if you were born around the time this movie came out and you watch this movie now, you're yeah, it's that Paul Rudd movie. It's an early Paul Rudd movie, or it's a really early, super early Bradley Cooper film. You're not looking at this as a Janine Garofalo vehicle. Because what has Janine Garofalo done in the last 10 years that's like a big commercial thing? Really, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that Janine Garofalo has done that's been like big and commercial. Although I will say I don't watch a lot of television. So if she's been in something that was popular on TV, sue me. I got 2 young daughters. So really, I mean, it's a funny movie to look back and watch, and you'll recognize a lot of other faces if you are into other, you know, uh, David Wayne and Michael Showalter films, or other works that they did on television. The State. That was another thing. I don't think young people these days know what The State was, but back then in '01 when this came out, you're like, oh, it's a movie. This is like the State movie. Like it's all the guys from The State and some of the guys from Kids in the Hall, and they're making a movie. Yeah, they made a movie. So this is like, you almost expect some of those characters like Doug from The State to show up, because it's like part of that franchise, right? It's not really, but it's interesting that you got all of those actors here. And Upright Citizens Brigade. Amy Poehler was in Upright Citizens Brigade from the '90s as well. They had a very funny sketch I want to say I probably saw it in the mid '90s, '96-ish, '97-ish, somewhere in there, about the Little Donnie disease. She played the mom of Little Donnie, and he had this huge penis, but he's not aware of his giant penis. And so he's just like running around with this blur between his legs. Completely inappropriate. I don't think they would put it on TV now. But the fact that it was on TV, I shit my pants laughing at Little Donnie, because they just have this giant cock down to his knees, and it's blurred out the whole time. But the blur is obviously swinging like left and right and front and center when he's jumping around and shit. And it is the most ridiculous thing to think of. Like, who thinks of, we're going to write a sketch about a little kid? It's an adult playing the kid, but it's a sketch about a little kid. He's like 9 years old or whatever. He's got a giant penis because of this weird genetic thing. And he's completely unaware of this giant dick. So he's going to like jump on a bicycle to ride away and smash his giant dick on the bicycle seat or something and fall off. And they got like Make-A-Wish. Anyway, it's good stuff. And all of these people, and people recognize Amy Poehler. I don't think people really connect her with Upright Citizens Brigade, because I don't think there's a lot of people on the internet right now at this moment talking about the Upright Citizens Brigade. In fact, I might be the only one in this very instance discussing the Upright Citizens Brigade, because that's like a 25-year-old sketch comedy troupe that hasn't done shit. Right here, this is my infant. That's my 1-year-old. Right there. So perfect, right? I mean, Andy as a character does not get a lot of characterization. He doesn't have a really full characterization. There's really no reason given for why he's such a fucking prick in this movie. He's mostly just a dick. The idea is he's like a young guy, and he's like a cool kid, and he's one of the like young, kind of hot, kind of attractive kids. He gets with women fairly easily, and he just doesn't really have a compelling, like when you're 16 and you're good looking and women want to have sex, like women your age want to have sex with you, have luck with other high school girls, and you're cool and everyone thinks you're cool and everyone kind of admires you, at least everyone that's like at your age, your peers all admire you. There's really no incentive to be like a good person. So you're just going to like do shit. And he just does shit. He's not even doing that to impress anyone, because he didn't think anybody was there. He just throws the fucking plate on the floor. And it's perfect characterization, because that's exactly what my 1-year-old does. Perfect characterization in a scene that you could easily chop out of this movie, because that scene didn't do anything to advance any of the narrative. As little overarching narrative as there is, the relationship between Beth, the camp counselor played by Janine Garofalo, and Andy played by Paul Rudd, that relationship, I mean, that might be their only scene together where it's just the two of them, and there's no overarching nothing. They're not going to pick that thread back up. They're not going to have Beth be some kind of role model for Andy and try to teach him how to not be such a young prick. He just gets to be a young dude 16-year-old, 17-year-old guy who's just a fucking prick. And in that sense, that scene could have gone. If that scene had not happened and you and I never saw it, we would never know it was there. We wouldn't miss it either. It wouldn't feel like some later development was then hollowed out because we didn't have these earlier scenes of this connection forged between Beth and Andy, because there is no connection. That scene only exists to characterize Andy a little bit, to give him a little bit of this, like, build out his dickheaded character. Again, it's a pretty flat character. He's not going to make any changes over the course of the film, but we have a firm view of who this person is. And again, for a film that's so character driven, that's what makes a scene like that important. That's why that scene of him just throwing the little tantrum, just like my 1-year-old does, is an important scene to write and film and leave in the movie for its final cut. I mean, because this is an hour and 45-minute film. It's not over long, but certainly there are shorter comedies. It could have been tightened up. I mean, you could make an argument for tightening this up to 90 minutes. You could shave out, maybe we shaved out 12 or 13 minutes. You could get this down to a tight hour and a half. That scene easily could have been one to go. But the fact that they left it in, I think gives this, it's not just that one scene, it's many scenes throughout this film that have this like room to breathe, which, I think enhances that feeling that I was mentioning earlier about the nostalgia and about this feeling like a personal film, about almost like a labor of love. Um, because like giving these characters, these oddball characters, and giving these weird kind of scenes this room to breathe, even if there's not like this, there's not this payoff in the end. It doesn't come back. It's about the ride being enjoyable, and this is a film where the ride is enjoyable. Um, I can't tell you how many films and television shows, particularly on Netflix, they're a big offender that my wife and I have watched, and we've sort of sat through because the premise was interesting enough, and it was like 1899 or some shit. There was like a 8-episode TV show on Netflix that was like this, where there was this overarching narrative, but each episode was not very interesting, and it went on almost too long. Like, we almost dropped out, and we just kept watching because we're like, if the payoff is good, then it's going to redeem all of these episodes that we kind of sat here watching, scratching our head. So there are films like that where, like, there's this twist ending, there's this payoff at the end that's incredibly satisfying, and that makes you walk away from the movie like, fuck, that's good. A film like that for me is The Dark Knight, where you get this ending voiceover by Gary Oldman as he's talking to his son amongst these images of Batman trying to escape as the police close in, and we find out he's going to get blamed for all of the stuff that Harvey Dent did because he can be the scapegoat. And then you get this end where just boom, cuts to black and the music swells. And to me, that is like a payoff moment. That, I mean, of course, the ride with Dark Knight is very fun as well. There's a lot of spectacle there, but it's the type of film that when it ends on that note, it's worth it all for that ending moment. So there are a lot of films like that. This film is not really one. Um, this is not really a film about the payoff. The movie just kind of ends, honestly. This film is really more about enjoying the ride. And isn't that a metaphor for your own misspent youth? I mean, we all like to think there's some payoff to life, but I mean, not really. When it's over, it's over. Hopefully we enjoy the ride. And we think about that, especially with youth. Like, you go to school, you get good grades, you do some extracurriculars, you take part in some clubs or something like that at school. You get into a good college, you get good grades there, you go to a good grad school, you go to med school, you go to law school, something like that. And that, like, the aggregated effect of all of this, living through your youth, your teenage years and early 20s, is to put you into this position, this payoff at the end where you can get a job as a lawyer and you can have a good security and stacks of cash, and you can ball harder than a motherfucker. And I think there's obviously the extreme where you don't enjoy your youth at all and you just, all you do is hit the books. And then on the other hand, there's the kids that I went to high school with and all they did was cut school and smoke pot, and I don't think any of them are better off for that. But this film is all about enjoying the ride. I love sluts. Sluts rock. That's a great line for this film. I love sluts. Sluts rock. And wouldn't you love sluts if you're a young single guy, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't you love a slut? It seems like they are interested in the same thing you're interested in as a young man. So, yeah, our interests are very overlapped. Let's do this. But obviously he's just kind of into her, and she's doing a good job. This is Marguerite Moreau, and she has the distinction of also having been in my buddy Corey's film Without Ward. So my buddy Corey got to work with her. I wish I could have met her. Oh, I got to get him to. Maybe he's still got her number or something like that. But that's an autograph that I would love to have on the case of Wet Hot American Summer. And she's done some other stuff, as many of the people in this film have too. Showalter he's a prolific director these days, but he's been in some other things as well. Some episodes of some TV, some other films, some of the films that he's made, some other people's films. But man, I tell you what, when he showed back up in the prequel, The First Day of Camp, the Netflix series, which is, of course, it was filmed 15 years after this, it was released 15 years after this. God damn, he got fat. Again, I'm not fat shaming anybody. Look, I'm pretty fat too, but look, it almost adds to the absurdity that this would be, some set some 8 weeks before this, but was filmed some 15 years later. And it shows with a lot of those actors. They're just they're old now. I mean, obviously they're all older than what they're playing here. All of the camp counselors, the Paul Rudd character, the Elizabeth Banks character that was just making out with him, she shows back up in Role Models too, another David Wayne film. But with those quote teenage characters, I mean, they're all being played by 10 years or so older. The actors are all late 20s, I think. So that on itself is supposed to be somewhat absurd, although I don't know. I think they costume them and make them up well enough that they're older actors clearly. Michael Showalter is not 17 years old, but on the other hand, it happens often enough in entertainment, and not even absurd entertainment. I mean, there's plenty of shows that are set in high school, like the Dawson's Creek type of shows, the One Tree Hill type of shows of the world, where you've got these actors that are playing 16, 17-year-old characters, 18-year-old characters, but are 23, 24, whatever. They just look young enough, right? They don't have a beard like me with white in it. They got, enough of a baby face that, okay, maybe they're not 16, but I can suspend my disbelief. And Paul Rudd is obviously about 30 or so, right there, right? I mean, he clearly appears to be about 30 years old. Nonetheless, I'm still kind of buying him as 16, 17. Elizabeth Banks even more so, because nobody heard of Elizabeth Banks. I remember when Seabiscuit came out, I was like, oh yeah, that's the girl from Wet Hot American Summer. She tasted like a burger, and Paul Rudd didn't like her anymore. That's the girl. But there's not even a name connected. I mean, it's not, she doesn't become, oh yeah, that's to a young kid watching this, that's the fucking girl from Hunger Games. Yeah, she's a fucking lady from the fucking Hunger Games movies. Doesn't even register. She's done other stuff. And so I think part of the absurdity is that that's an absurd cut. You may have to rewind that, but she's stitching this blanket, and when Janine Garofalo's character comes by, she's got one row done. Mere seconds later, David Hyde Pierce's character Henry comes into the frame. It cuts back to her, and look, she's got a whole fucking blanket right there. So that is what we call a continuity error. In a lot of films, that happens by accident, because sometimes these shots are filmed not necessarily the same time, and so continuity errors often occur. But the genius of this film is continuity errors can happen anywhere, right? I mean, they don't tend to happen in really big budget stuff like Avatar, because they've got a lot of money to look for those and correct them. But in a lot of films, continuity errors happen, and most of the time it's stuff that you don't even notice as an audience member that you were supposed to notice. That was an intentional continuity error that you're supposed to notice. It's supposed to reward you for multiple viewings. You might not notice that the first time you watch Wet Hot American Summer, but maybe the third or fourth you notice it. Here we go. I love this montage. We've got Rick Springfield here. This is Love Is All Right. This is from his album Working Class Dog, which I mentioned as an anachronism because it was released in 1983. It's a perfect song for this section of the film, for this montage where they go to town. And this is really where shit gets kind of absurd. This is where continuity goes out the window, and you really have to accept this film for its absurdity, or you just have to realize that this is not going to be for you because it's just absurd. Because they go from eating French fries to smoking cigarettes to drinking beer to smoking pot to buying cocaine in the alleyway from a guy in a leather jacket to mugging an old lady for her purse so that they can get her money and buy heroin. Now they're all doing fucking heroin in this bombed out trap house of 1981. And this is supposed to be in fucking Maine somewhere, Windham, Maine, or something like this. This is supposed to be taking place in my neck of the woods. Actually, I'm mere seconds away from Maine, in New Hampshire here. But you know, for them to spend an hour or so in town and progress from eating French fries to black tar heroin really is the height of incredulity. And then to return to town after that previous scene, we just saw them all passed out doing their best Train Spotting reference. There's an intertextual reference there. You recognize scenes like that because of Train Spotting, which you know, obviously this is an 81. It's set way before Train Spotting ever came out. But you know, what you have is they're all strung out in this crack house, and then they go back to camp and everyone's fine. Everyone's bone sober. No one's got track marks. No cops come looking for the kids who mugged the old lady or bought the humongous bag of cocaine, by the way. Let's all be fucking real at how big that bag of fucking cocaine was. But I love that scene. That's an anachronism. They used music that is of the era. If you're watching this in 2001 when it was released, you hear Rick Springfield, Working Class Dog, or it's Love Is All Right from the album Working Class Dog. It's the first track on that. I've got that album on vinyl actually. Recently, my wife bought me that album on vinyl. But if you've got that, if you've watched this film and you get that reference, you think, okay, Rick Springfield, early 80s, yeah, Love Is All Right. It's of that time period, even though the album was released about 2 years after this movie took place. So, you know, it's a bit of an anachronism, but it's not enough of one that it's going to fuck with you, because they're already putting in these intentional continuity errors that I was just mentioning, where that blanket went from one little row to an entire blanket that he's like finishing up in mere seconds. And when you put that type of thing in intentionally, yes, it's there to pat people on the back for noticing their third or fourth time. That really is how you build a cult following, by the way, is really give your audience, like, pat them on the back a little bit for noticing the small things. They will keep coming back, and they will love you for putting this stuff in and making it like for them. Like, I noticed this thing that took me 4 times to notice. But then on the other hand, if you fuck up and make a real continuity error, if you actually make a mistake later in the film or even earlier in the film, you're immediately forgiven. It's actually a genius stroke, because if you have an absurdist comedy, it doesn't work if you're making The Godfather or Goodfellas or something, right? It's supposed to be a serious film. But if you're making an absurdist comedy, the very first thing you want to do is throw in a couple of intentional continuity errors, because then if anybody notices any unintentional continuity errors, they're just going to chalk them up. Oh yeah, they're continuing that gag, that continuity error gag, because this is an absurd film. Here we learned that our friend the beekeeper, our narrator, he's not even plugged in. And you sort of have to love that too, that, you know, he spent his whole summer like DJing this radio station that not only is nobody fucking listening to, nobody could if they wanted to. Even if they fucking tuned in, they're just going to hear static. And it's just like this extra little touch. It makes no real difference to the narrative outcome of the film that he's not plugged in at all, that he's been broadcasting to an audience of only himself for 8 fucking weeks. It doesn't matter. It's a obviously it's a funny sight gag for us. Like, holy shit, none of this shit's even plugged in. It hasn't been for 8 weeks. How is this kid? And he's got a great voice too. I mean, the funny thing is that's not the kid's real voice. They had somebody come in and dub the voice. But the funny thing is he's got a good voice. It's a nice voice on that kid. But nobody can even hear it. Like, he seems to be doing a good enough job for a young kid. Give him responsibility of a radio station. And it's also maybe supposed to be something like Meatballs, where you have those scenes of him making the announcements to the camp on that PA equipment. He doesn't use a radio, I don't believe, in Meatballs. It's been a few years since I've seen Meatballs, but I think they just use a loudspeaker. But at any rate, I mean, no one's even hearing this voiceover that kind of weaves these disparate stories together. And of course, this is absurd too, right? I mean, the Victor Pulak character, this gentleman here with the Jufro, and I say that with love, as a man who has a Jufro himself, covered up by my Georgia hat right now. Real recognizes real. I love how it's absurd. Like, look at the road. He wasn't even swerving to miss a deer or a little kid or anything. He just, he's just singing. He's looking out the road. He's totally sober. And then, oh no. And he just crashes into a tree on a perfectly, like, it's absurd, right? I mean, if you didn't want to make that absurd, you could write a more realistic car crash. The idea is you need him to total the van, right? It doesn't matter how it happens. But it's supposed to be absurd. Like, it matters for this film, and you don't want it to be he swerved to avoid hitting a deer, or he swerved to avoid hitting a little girl, or some shit like that. If it was a horror film, then it's like a little girl dressed in white in the middle of the road and it's after dark and shit, like it's all fucking creepy as fuck. But this movie is just, he's just driving, oh no, and then cut to the stuntman absolutely demolishing that car by just driving it into a fucking tree. That'd be a fun day. The idea is that he just has to get to this point where it's going to take him the rest of the movie to try to get back to camp, to try and have sex with this girl. And the revelation here is that she's just fucking everybody. It doesn't even matter. I mentioned earlier, she's kind of the camp slut. I'm not slut shaming. I agree with Coop. We love sluts. Their interests align largely with ours as males, but she is the camp slut. And while he's gone, he places her like on this pedestal, right? Because Victor Pulak character is a virgin. That's the irony. He's like this virgin who's trying to lose his virginity at camp or whatever. And that's a trope that kind of gets turned on its head, because this girl that he's sort of building up is just whatever. Like, who cares? Like, she's just gonna do it with whoever's got a stick of gum for her to split. And his whole exodus from the river, where he's supposed to be taking these campers down the river, which is another absurd thing to do on the last day of camp. That's not something you do on the last day of camp, go for an overnight trip on the river. No, you fucking pack your shit and you get ready to leave. So the guy pursuing him, of course, the character pursuing him has a motorcycle. He's going to run. We're going to see them in the same shot. Here he runs by the rabbit, and the motorcycle's right behind him, like 10 yards, maybe, almost till you could reach out and touch him. And yet somehow he's not able. We have that nice dissolve where he's still right behind the guy. Like the background changes. They've obviously been running. That dissolve is meant to communicate like the elapse of time. And now he runs up against this bay of hail, and it takes him a minute to decide to jump over it. And then, of course, the motorcycle, he can't go around it. Look at that. He almost laid that motorcycle down. And this is absurd, right? Like, you watch this and you think, I don't know, it's stupid. But it's stupid enough to be funny. I think if you like absurd humor. If you don't like absurd humor, then you probably watched that whole scene and just thought that was the fucking dumbest thing I've ever seen. I think of my buddy Ross, who really has very poor taste in comedy in general, in my opinion, at least. I don't think he knows a good comedy. And that's his deficiency to deal with. But I think especially when it comes to kind of absurd situations, stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense or reflect how things would unfold in the real life, I don't think he's got much time or patience for. The suspension of disbelief in a comedy film for him is very, very difficult. An absurd comedy film, he's not doing it. And so that last scene, I think he would just look at it and say, this is the dumbest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm not even going to watch the rest of this movie. This is just fucking stupid. It's not even funny. But that's really where they kind of dial it up. I mean, we're watching this film as it gets more and more absurd. The situations that unfold are just dumber and dumber. And, you're either along for the ride or you aren't. And I hope you're along for the ride here so you can listen to the rest of my fucking commentary. Here's where it is revealed that McKinley, right there, played by Michael Ian Black, is in a relationship with Bradley Cooper's character. They are gay, and they are in a gay relationship together. And it is probably the most sensitive and like beautiful and well realized relationship in this entire film. There's a lot of like boyfriend girlfriend, romantic relationships in this film, and this one is like the most like tender and beautiful. Both of these actors are straight, by the way. So they are completely, and I know this day and age, it's like casting a straight actor to play a gay character is considered forbidden. I think this movie I think kind of gets away with it because it's sort of grandfathered in. You can have these two straight actors, and then the ball falling. I mean, I think that's meant to be kind of funny and poke a little fun because the ball's in the way. Yeah, the balls are in the way, dog. It's the two dudes fucking. But nonetheless, like their relationship throughout this movie is like really actually like very tender and loving. And that was meant to be funny too, because they're like, oh, we got to get McKinley laid. And then it cuts to him butt fucking his boyfriend in the shed at camp. And so he's getting himself laid just fine, guys. You don't need to help him. You just don't realize what he's into. But it is kind of funny that that gay relationship, it's not a punchline. Like in that sense, it's funny because it cuts to him having sex in a way that the other characters didn't expect because they don't know that he's gay. But at the same time, they carry that relationship. That thread is one of the few threads that continues throughout this film to the end. And the gay characters, McKinley and Bradley Cooper's character, are characterized in a very sympathetic way throughout the rest of their scenes. Like they're pretty well realized for a character in this film, and they're not really the butt of a joke. I mean, even their sex scene that is meant to be a humorous juxtaposition with the other characters' discussion about how they need to get McKinley laid, it's nonetheless like it's like they're making love almost. Like it's like tender and poignant in a way that, as silly and stupid and absurd as this film is, it has that kind of undercurrent of like poignance and nostalgia. And so it's kind of cute. Like they're gonna mine that gay relationship for some more jokes throughout the rest of this film. And it's just pretty neat how they managed to do that and not make the gay couple feel just like this dumb joke, this butt of a joke. But here, these characters, we're going to get a little bit of payoff here. They're going to realize that they were wrong. They think McKinley's about to bone Amy Poehler's character, and they think, oh, that flute's weird, but maybe it's kind of kinky. Maybe that's like the character's like kinky, like he's down, he's with it. Play the fucking flute. Then they see the rest. See, we get this reveal as the camera moves. We get this pan. It's meant to simulate their point of view, but really they would be able to see the whole thing. They're just standing in the lake, and they're getting, I don't know. I don't think gay marriage was legal in Maine in 1981, but a lot of people in New England don't give one fuck. So, it's like a weird kind of civil union because it's completely unofficial, right? They're supposed to be playing like 16-year-old, 17-year-old characters. Like they can't, even if gay marriage was legal, you can't enter into one at 16. So, yeah. So there they realize, and they even use the word fag. And again, that's another thing that's, in '01 you could get away with that a little bit more than nowadays. That's a pretty offensive term, but I think, in this case, it works well. Like they have to say that McKinley's a fag and use that offensive terminology, because what we need as an audience to expect them to have a very negative reaction. Their response to finding out that McKinley is gay is supposed to be negative. We're supposed to be as worried as McKinley is that they're going to find out. So we're like, oh God, what are these guys going to do? Because when they're throwing fag words around so callously, and I mean, again, it's 1981. It's more in keeping with the period. It's like if they made a movie from the 1920s, you don't really expect to hear the racist white characters saying African American. You expect to hear some more coarse language that both reflects the time as well as the characterization. And so, in this case, it's an important setup that is going to pay off later that they say the fag word. So, offensive, yes, but setup for a joke, also yes. And I don't know if I was gay. I don't know if I would be offended by that or not. But I think it's pretty good payoff, and I don't think the filmmakers are in any way, shape, or form prejudiced against gay folks. So another favorite line of mine. I do love when women say that they've been busting their balls, when they use it as like a kind of a when they ambiguate it a little bit more. I understand that women do not have testicles most of the time. I mean, some women have balls, sure. We live in that day and age where, yeah, there are women out there. There are she hers that have testicles, and absolutely we must accept that, or we're bigots. But yeah, of course. So there are some women with balls. I don't get the sense that Amy Poehler's character is meant to be trans in this film. I don't think that's a statement of her as a trans character. Like, she has testicles because she was born natally a male and transitioned to female at some point before her 16th birthday, before this film takes place. So I think it's meant more to be kind of comical in that, of course, most women, cis women, don't have testicles. But to say I'm busting my balls has a certain colloquial meaning, right? I could say I'm busting my balls. That means I'm working hard. It doesn't mean that, or I've been going through a lot of bullshit, but it doesn't mean that I've literally hurt my testicles in any way. So I do like it when women say that. I like it when women say "suck my dick." I like it when apparently I like really coarse women. But no, my wife is actually quite coarse, so apparently I do. But I do like those when those type of statements are ambiguated a little bit. A lady says "suck my dick." It's hard not to laugh at that. It's hard not to giggle at how silly that sounds, even though in the ambiguated sense, it's perfectly valid for a female to say, "I've been busting my balls," because it has a meaning to us that doesn't have anything to do with literal testicles, and yet it still sounds funny coming from a woman, a cis woman who does not have testicles, or "suck my dick" for the same reason. And so I do love that line. I always love when Amy Poehler, and she just delivers it so well. I mean, you have to appreciate Amy Poehler for the outburst, for that over the top kind of outburst, and those antics are perfectly in place in this film. And there's more continuity errors. Obviously, we have a nice sunny shot here. We have this kind of from the ground perspective where the kids are seated, looking up at Janine Garofalo's character who's standing. So of course the camera's going to be positioned in a way that you see a lot of the sky above her, and you can see that it's only very partly clouded, very little bit of clouds, big friendly fluffy ones too, not the grim dark rainy ones. A lot of blue sky. This is all taking place on one single day, but we have other scenes where it's quite overcast, and it goes back and forth. So it's not like it was rainy in the morning and then it's sunny in the evening, and they sort of wrote that in the film. It's just that they filmed this over the course of a couple of weeks, and some days it was really sunny, and other days it was overcast, and this is all supposedly taking place on a single day, and so you just sort of have to deal with that continuity or lack thereof, those issues with the continuity where it's like it'll go from being super sunny. Here's another continuity error: the barbecue sauce on her face moves as it cuts back and forth between her and Andy. uh Apparently it increases, but it's a fun continuity error to watch, is that she's sort of like more and less barbecue sauce depending on which shot you're looking at, and that was intentional. That's an easy one to say, oh yeah, I meant to do that, but we filmed it over the course of 2 days, or 2 afternoons or whatever. Uh, we fucked it up, okay, but we're gonna say it was on purpose. This, like McKinley's gay relationship with Bradley Cooper's character, this relationship between David Hyde Pierce and Henry is the name of the character, and Janine Garofalo's Beth, is also meant to be one of the overarching relationships. This is like one of the few kind of overarching, gets us through the movie. And we have this really insane capture the flag game going on at the same time, which is about to get even more wild, I think, here. Of course, their romance develops. It doesn't hurt that David Hyde Pierce is a gay man playing straight. I think that adds to the absurdity. I think even in '01 we knew he was gay, right? Somebody else who's more familiar with the culture around David Hyde Pierce can tell me when he came out, because he plays straight in Frasier too. I love that show. And here we have an actual Kenyan. This is a legitimate, like he was a legitimate. I can't remember the name of the Kenyan gentleman, but he is a bona fide, real ass Kenyan from fucking Kenya, and an Olympian to boot. And so what he's doing at a Jewish camp, I don't know if it's officially a Jewish camp, but it was intended by the filmmakers that pretty much all of the campers and staff are pretty much mostly Jewish. It's a mostly Jewish camp. I don't know that it doesn't seem to be affiliated with religion or have a religious component in any way. It seems to be a normal camp, but by some happenstance, by some coincidence of the local demographics of people sending their kids to camp there, most of them happen to be Jewish, and it is a running joke. And Beth will pick that up a little bit. Janine Garofalo will pick that up a little bit later. But where the Kenyan came from, obviously Kenya, but how he actually got to a camp in Maine, there's no explanation. Again, it's an absurd film. You've either accepted that a Kenyan can appear and win this silly capture the flag game, or not. But it gives this opportunity for Coop, character of Coop, to sort of dive after him and try to grab him and try to get him, and then land on the ground, but then look up at Marguerite Moreau's character and sort of smile at her, and they're smiling and waving and laughing, and sort of shows a little bit of chemistry between them, that maybe the thing that Cooper really wants is going to happen, and there's going to be something that's going to develop between them, and we're going to see an extension of that here. This is the other relationship, along with McKinley's gay relationship and Beth and Henry. This is the other relationship that kind of gets us through the film, with Cooper being not quite the singular protagonist of this film, because I don't believe that this film necessarily has like one singular protagonist, but he and Janine Garofalo's character are probably the closest thing we have to singular protagonists of this film. And in their case, I guess it would be a twin protagonist type of thing. We have dual protagonists, because the film does end on them in the final shot. So I do think they're elevated by the end of the film. And by that final shot, I think they're elevated to a level of significance that's maybe above the other characters. But their relationships do tend to be the through line here. And we see Cooper, his relationship with Marguerite Moreau's character sort of developing here. And they have camp goats. And that whole scene was really just that whole capture the flag scene was really just to give like Cooper an excuse to sort of dive and fall in a dramatic way, and then everyone's laughing and enjoying and clapping, and they lock eyes, and that leads us into this scene. So I do believe it's an artful way to proceed, and but again, it's another scene that's like, well, there's a Kenyan that comes out of nowhere. It's all really pointless, and it is also silly that they're cold, so they're exchanging coats, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna need that back. She's like, what now? Yeah, now. So it's all very absurd. And again, he winds up wearing both, which is really silly. And I don't know how cold it would be on August the 18th. Even in Maine, in mid-August, it's not very cold. I can vouch for August the 18th in Maine. It's not cold. It's not very cold at all, particularly when you're outdoors and there's no air conditioning. Fuck that. It's hot. It's not Tucson, Arizona hot, but it's warm enough that you could be fine in the short sleeves. And so there we see the kiss. We get that music that swells up with it, and there we see this. Oh, maybe things are going to go well for Cooper, but it doesn't, and we're going to see that sort of unravel as well. It's also meant to be absurd with Molly Shannon's character here, like getting a mature relationship advice from children. This young kid winds up being something of a therapist for her. and they're all sort of encouraging her to be, like emotionally strong. And her character is, obviously in and out of relationships, a lot of out of relationships, and just seems to be like this serial kind of monogamist, sort of like married and then divorced and then married and then divorced, and just can't really hold anything together. But these kids are like bolstering her in this way, particularly that one kid who's just kind of bolstering her in a way that's really. I have a cheat sheet here with the names on it. I really ought to use this. I haven't been using it, but like I ought to use I have a cheat sheet right here in front of me. It's got the names on it. What's the name of that kid actually that's been Aaron is the name of that character, is the young kid that's sort of I don't know, giving her therapy, the free therapy to try to like, get her past this. And the idea that that could happen in one day, that she could be at the beginning of the day so broken up and distraught by her breakups with these guys that then by the end of the day, she's like totally healed and she's in this emotional place. Gene's character, the camp cook from Law and Order, Gene's character has a similar arc, that he's just like psychologically completely fucked up in the morning, but by the end of the day, the end of that 24-hour period, he's like cool, he's enlightened. I mean, he even goes further, like he's not just psychologically okay, like he's borderline enlightened. And that's also just part of the absurdity of smashing all of this into one day. I love how harsh they are with these kids. Particularly Amy Poehler's characters, super harsh. Their performances are, I mean, look, they're hobbyists doing a performance at camp. The fact that she's like this, like Broadway Nazi that's like holding them to the highest standard is actually kind of amusing too. And here, Coop is about to learn some hard truths. Unfortunately, she's talking to Andy's character. What is that? Coop, Katie. Katie's that's Coop's would-be girlfriend's character. I keep calling her by the actress's name, Marguerite Moreau, but Katie. And he's still feeling that like sense of triumph, like he won over Paul Rudd's character of Andy. But it's not to be. Now, see, we got McKinley sitting with his husband, I guess here. Here's the payoff for that, the use of the fag word. It's like, uh-oh, these guys know. What are they about to do? They're about to do something. So they got him a chaise lounge, that's like a ridiculous thing. But it's also like, oh, well, they're not. Look, they're like really supportive. Like, it doesn't make sense that they were saying that McKinley's a fag. Like, it doesn't make sense that they would use such a, at least by today's standards, so offensive of a word as a descriptor when they're like totally so like they're like hugging him and like, oh, congratulations. Like, it's a chaise lounge, which is another ridiculous thing because did you see how fucking big it was? Okay, Amazon didn't exist in 1981. Same day delivery, especially on chaise lounges in 1981, was not a fucking thing. It said Crate and Barrel really fucking big. Do you think these kids got in the fucking car in a truck and drove to fucking Crate and Barrel on this packed of a day? So where's the fucking chaise lounge come from? You're not even supposed to ask yourself questions like this. But I've watched this movie every year, at least once a year, every year since 2002, 2003. I've seen it at least 20 times, maybe 24 times. H. John Benjamin, you guys probably recognize that voice from Archer. Popular show. I love that show. Maybe even a Arby's commercial or two, Bob's Burgers. Of course, nobody knew who H. John Benjamin was in 2001. Archer wasn't a thing. Bob's Burgers wasn't a thing. Arby's was a thing, but he wasn't doing any voices in their commercials. That's Archer. I can suck my own dick. I do it a lot. I like that addition too, because it's like, if you can suck your own dick, wouldn't you do it a lot? I mean, wouldn't that be your preferred method of masturbation? So was that scene with the talking vegetables? Was that is there a real? Have we entered into the territory of not just absurd, like human interactions, but have we entered the territory of like really, like sci-fi and fantasy? Is anything possible at this camp? Aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, interdimensional travel, multiverse. I mean, are we going to get into that type of thing in this film? This film definitely does the right thing in terms of dialing up the absurdity as we go along. And as we accept more and more, the film asks us to accept more and more. So it definitely it wins by degrees, by sort of advancing this absurdity by degree. It's just this sort of slow boil of absurdity, if you will. So you can't introduce the talking can of vegetables in the first 15 minutes. You really do have to wait as the film builds to an absurd crescendo. Now you can introduce the talking vegetables. Are we to believe that this is objectively a can of talking vegetables? I mean, we do see the character of Gary talk to him, say maybe we should talk to him. He holds the can of vegetables up and says maybe we should talk. Maybe you should talk to him. And then a few minutes later, we see a scene where the can of vegetables actually does talk to Gene. So, I mean, that makes you think that, yeah, it is a talking can of vegetables. And Gary suggested to the talking can of vegetables that he should have a conversation with Gene. And so the talking can of vegetables has a conversation with Gene. Here's all the campers are Jewish payoff. She's asking about all the campers and just kind of making up Jewish names, which honestly ought to be offensive, but all the filmmakers are Jewish. So, you know what I mean? It's sort of, it's a push. Honestly, as offensive as this movie is, I think I can't remember if there's the use of the word cunt. There's a couple uses of the word fag. Obviously, I've pointed those out. There's a lot of like all the campers are Jewish type of thing. Honestly, it really ought to be more offensive. I really don't think this is a very offensive film at all, despite some of that language being really like kind of I don't know, kind of forbidden in today's culture. So this is where Gene, he had that conversation with the talking vegetables and he decides to own who he is. He doesn't care if people knows he has dick cream. He doesn't care if people knows he fondles his sweaters or humps the fridge or anything else. And now he's introducing them to the talking can of vegetables. And again, we have to wonder, is that can of talking vegetables objectively a living sentient creature, can of vegetables, or is he just a crazy person? And this scene makes him look a lot like he's a crazy person. He's holding a can of vegetables, clearly inanimate. It doesn't have any anthropomorphic features at all. Even earlier when the lid would flap up and down like a mouth, the lid is completely closed and it's inert. People don't seem to be frightened of him, like he's just this crazy person that's been putting food on their table for the last 8 weeks. They're all very supportive again of Gene. It's just accepting his absurdity. Like, yeah, maybe he thinks this can of vegetables is a talking can of vegetables. Or maybe they all already know that the can of vegetables is talking because they've already had some form of inspirational conversation with it themselves. You can't rule that possibility out, that maybe all of them have had encounters with the talking can of vegetables. And it's just like one of the camp counselors. It's just going to have a chat with you at some point during the summer and help you to work your shit out like it did for Gene, where he's humping the fridge. And I like to imagine that Gene humping the fridge is YouTube butt fucking my creativity because I have to cover this up on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please revisit my Patreon page tomorrow, or maybe you're watching this on Patreon. Hopefully you're watching it uncovered because Patreon doesn't restrict me. There's a subplot that the radio kid hasn't been showering, of course, so they shower him, and this is notable because, again, it's another really pointless scene. Like, who cares if this kid showers or not? The idea was that as a counselor, McKinley couldn't let the kid go back to his parents tomorrow without having showered all summer because he'll get in trouble, right? For the kid not showering, they'll hold him accountable. So they have to shower. But the real purpose of that scene was to show 7:34, go through the scene where they force the kid to shower, show them coming out victorious, and then 7:35. It's really to drive home all this bullshit is happening in one day, and it's ludicrous that all of this would happen in one day. But here's like 1 minute, right? Here's 60 seconds. And yeah, it doesn't take long to grab a kid and force him to shower, like hold him in the shower while you quickly like run water over him and kind of scrub his hair a little bit and then walk out of the shower. But even still, it's more than 60 seconds, in my opinion, as a guy who's showered. I mean, you got to hold the kid down. You got to get him out of there. This is another absurdity, like meet me over here in 1 minute or 10 seconds or whatever. And she stands there for 10 seconds and walks over and meets him there at the table where all the nerdy kids are assembled. Also, that kid with the suspenders, he's supposed to be one of the younger campers, the early teens, 12, 13 kind of age, the same age as the nerdy kid with the glasses and the makeshift cape. But the actor is like quite obviously mid-20s. They don't linger on him in many shots, but in a few of the shots where they do, you can look and just say, shit. I mean, he's actually closer to David Hyde Pierce's age than he is to 12 or 13 or whatever he's supposed to be playing. Again, it doesn't matter. In this film, we're fine with that type of thing. It does get a little harder to watch in First Day of Camp on Netflix because it's like these guys are like 50 and they're supposed to be playing 16-year-olds. So here's where we get the idea that Andy's character really is pretty flat too. He's just kind of a douche. Like he's not as funny as he thinks he is, and he's actually quite dumb. And fairly lazy. He's like, I don't want to talk to you for 3 minutes, but fine. And so, of course, Coop makes the point that, like, if you care for this girl, you'll just, like, let her go because, you don't care for her. He admits that he doesn't care for her. But then he also admits, like, yeah, I want to keep banging her. Like, she's hot. Like, I want to continue to have sex with this person. And if I break up with her for altruistic reasons, yeah, maybe that'll make me a better person, but then I won't be able to continue to have sex with her. So, it's an interesting thing, but it's not an avenue that Coop can really explore. And here we get the Looney Tunes, kind of a Looney Tunes moment. He steps in a random bucket that was outside the bunk, which sort of makes sense, but then he kicks it, slips on a banana peel, lands in a pool, like a kiddie pool, which for some reason is there. It makes no sense because that's like a toddler pool. That's a pool I put my 1-year-old in. And then the bucket lands on his head. And that's just, like that's right out of a cartoon. Like character slips, bucket lands on his head. I mean, that's so unlikely and so cartoonish that it's like really, again, I don't know that that's a laugh out loud moment, but it is a moment that like it just helps to build on this film's sense of like I don't know. I recognize some stuff, the fashion, the camp, it all looks very realistic, but then you also have this like cartoonish sense. The narrative is just completely cartoonish. And here you get the reference, the intertextual reference to like those 70s kung fu movies is kind of a homage to like kung fu, the old David Carradine show from the early 70s, which would very much be like a culturally known thing in the early 80s. But also it doesn't matter because what's really more important is that the viewer today watching this movie understand what this is a reference to. And now that Gene has been enlightened via his experience, he can now become the guide or mentor to a younger character. So he sort of is able to pass the torch. Not only is he able to like recover from his PTSD and like become a whole person and become enlightened, he is now able to take on that mentor role for Coop here. And again, keep in mind, this is taking place after dinner. This entire montage is taking place after 7:35, because that's the last time I think that we saw on the screen was 7:35. So this is taking place. I mean, that doesn't look like 7:35 if we're just looking at the daylight. It looks like afternoon. It looks like 5 p.m. maybe. And we get this montage of Coop's training is very like unspecific, but there's your reference to kung fu as well, right? Snatch the pebble from my hand. When you can take the pebble from my hand, it will be time for you to leave. That's the reference here, and he is able to take the pebble from Gene's hand, but most of the rest of the montage is just them either running like Rocky on a beach in Rocky 3, or it's him dancing, and then this weird kind of like therapy session with old ladies, and it's just ludicrous because it's like, where are they even coming from? but it is a scene that undoubtedly brings a smile to my face. And Gary's there, and so is the can of vegetables, and this crew kind of congeals there. Where Gene and Coop didn't really have any interaction up to this point in the film, but Gene is there to mentor him. And here's the Rocky 3. We get that freeze frame, and really that film language. Look, that took place between 7:35 and 7:51, and at 7:51 it's fucking pitch black out. It goes from being sunset to pitch black, and all of that happened in the space of 20 minutes ish. It's pretty absurd. That whole montage wasn't 20 minutes. That was weeks, in film language, right? So like we have this weird juxtaposition of like film language that we know and recognize, things like that freeze frame that communicates a certain thing to us, like, oh, that's an 80s freeze frame. It looks just like fucking Rocky 3 or whatever. They're him and Apollo are on the fucking beach, and it's very homoerotic, but we don't mind. We don't mind that subtext. But they communicate to us in film language in this movie. And but then they also completely subvert that language that they use. They show us this montage, and training montages have come to mean, over the course of decades of film history, training montages have meant the condensation of many days or even weeks of whatever that montage is training. Whatever they were training for, it was all kind of silly, dance training or whatever. That montage is meant to elapse time for us. But then we see this montage that feels like it took 2 weeks, but it unfolded over less than 20 minutes, is really pretty ridiculous. And again, it's just absurdity built on top of absurdity, to the point where even the film language that we're accustomed to having a consistent meaning across works, a consistent intertextual meaning, really begins to unravel and have less and less meaning. I mean, like it's not absurd enough for a can of vegetables to have a conversation with people and to be treated with the respect due a person. We actually have to go to the point of like unraveling a film at the meta level, and not like where they break the fourth wall. I think that's maybe a little too easy. Not where, the film stops and all the characters start addressing the camera. We see stuff like that in Goodfellas at the end. Ray Liotta's character finally like starts to address the viewer. Here it doesn't unravel to that sense where they're going to acknowledge us as viewers. Not directly. I mean, they tend to acknowledge us as viewers with a more like tongue in cheek, those kind of intentional continuity errors and stuff. But it really does really start to break the idea down of like this film happening and this film language, this montage having the meaning that we're accustomed to. It's really just images in front of us on the screen. It doesn't have to mean anything. And of course, things culminate. We still have a narrative structure here that is reliable, recognizable. We have this day culminating in this singular event that was kind of important. It was on everyone's mind, at least, with the show, the talent show, on that final night. Here's some good economy. Like, he's supposed to save these kids that have apparently been precariously placed on this river. He's supposedly saving them, and they've been sitting there all day waiting for him to come back and save them, but he manages to save them in mere seconds, and then obviously it doesn't even show any of that, right? So it sort of builds this whole thing up like he's got to save these kids. He doesn't want to do it, and when he finally does it, they don't even show it to us. They just show us the other character's reaction, and then sort of have this cheesy, like, the movie's not about Victor Pulak getting laid, although I'd like to think that he has some sex tonight afterward. Poor guy. Give him something. Give him something. That's Neil. Neil is the other character with the glasses that's been after him all day. But his story is his through line is basically over. He was coerced into saving the kids. There's really no point in him even leaving, because narratively he leaves just to come back again. It really just kind of gets us to. He just realizes that this girl, when she's making out with that kid that was shouting at all the different scenes, lunch, breakfast, lunch, dinner, or whatever. She's like making out with this like 13-year-old kid. When he gets back and he's like, Abby, what are you doing? Like, it's all for his realization that she doesn't care about him and that he's unimportant to her. and that he's built her up in his mind to be, this almost goddess that he just needs to be with, and that her feelings are nowhere near the same. And I think that's as much of a character arc as we're going to get, is that he realizes that, um, it wasn't meant to be. And, whatever he felt about her, she does not reciprocate. And that she might be willing to have some sex with him, but that's the same as everybody else. She's willing to have sex with everybody. And of course, here, we have the culmination of also the sort of the nerdy arc with David Hyde Pierce's character being an associate professor of astronomy or whatever it is. It's either maybe it's even astrophysics. I mean, it might be some like Neil deGrasse Tyson shit. And he's been hanging out with the nerdy kids all day at Beth's bequest. But the culmination of that arc was revealed to us in an earlier scene, where he realizes part of Skylab is falling. That's another cultural reference. It was one of those things at the early 80s. I don't remember, of course. So I'm told that, Skylab was like falling apart, or was coming apart. It was re-entering Earth's orbit. And there was like actual concern in this weird kind of like pre-internet days of like, you're worried about like the free candy, the van with free candy on it, and you're also worried that like Skylab is going to fall out of the sky and land on you. But it's like one of those, almost like an urban legend, right? Like, oh, if you're like Skylab is going to fall and hit you, or like it's going to fall out of the sky and it's going to hurt somebody. I don't know that it ever did. But this film kind of capitalizes on that, and in a way that's maybe so organic that if you're watching this without that cultural knowledge, like if you're younger than me and you're not really aware of that, like brief cultural phenomena, but it's like, would you even realize that that's actually a reference to something real? I don't know. I don't think that I did initially either, until I actually kind of read about it or heard about it. And I was like, oh, they really did think Skylab was going to like fall and crush people in the early 80s. That was weird. This whole thing is meant to build up dramatic tension, but it's like intercut with these kids doing their like the talent show, I guess. They're like entertaining. You gotta love this kid too. It's like the white kid who's doing the obviously like black stand up. Like he listened to Eddie Murphy a few times. They're like, motherfucker, don't make me so the brothers be like, pretty good caricature, I think. And then you have it intercut with this, the nerdy kids and David Hyde Pierce's character Henry just trying to, like, I don't know, save camp, because they're able to like, I don't know, they're able to generate these random numbers that allow them. The mechanic is not very well explained at all, because you have to accept that Skylab is falling. It means it's a cultural reference to something that wasn't even like, people were actually worried about it, but it wasn't even like a real threat. You know what I mean? It's, at least if you had like a cultural reference to the AIDS epidemic of the 80s, then like that was real. Like people were maybe more afraid than they needed to be, because it's not like everybody was catching AIDS. But like if you did get HIV back then, I mean, it was a fairly dire thing. I mean, it killed Eazy-E of all people. So, with the Skylab thing, it's like, it's beyond silly. Again, it's just dialing up the absurdity. There's Judah Friedlander. Did some more work in 30 Rock. That's where I recognized his face afterward. I was like, oh, he's the guy from, I'd be watching 30 Rock in 2006 or 2007. Oh, that's the guy from fucking Wet Hot American Summer. He's got a small role in 30 Rock. Again, it's like a lot of stuff connects back to this film. For someone who watched this film, shortly after it was released, for somebody who watches this film now and has like a cultural reference from prior to seeing this film, they'll be like, holy shit, he was in this. He was in that. Famous ass Bradley Cooper was in this fucking movie. Yeah, he was. Nobody thought he was going to go fucking get nominated for Academy Awards and shit and fucking make a movie with motherfucking Lady Gaga on them. And these are the kids that they were, she says, oh, my kids suck dick, but here they are. She berates them and prepares the audience for them to be terrible. And then you listen to her and you're like, actually, wow, They do really well. Like, she's the only one singing. She's got an incredible voice, and obviously the costumes are all homemade, but they've got like real backdrops, and everybody gets in and starts singing along, and it's like by far, like when compared to the kid doing the black stand up and the other kid like lighting his fart on fire. I mean, like, this is like high art compared to that. And Amy Poehler's character still, like, they suck dick, they're terrible, they're awful, but okay, whatever, here they are. When in actuality, it's like the talent level on them is way higher than, and she's playing the piano behind her while turned around. She's like doing their backup music with not even looking at the piano. And again, might I point out, mostly Jewish camp. So when they all start booing, you have to wonder, is it because the audience is like 85, 90% Jewish and they just flashed the cross? Or are they booing as a continuation of Amy Poehler's joke where she says, oh, they suck, they're terrible, but okay, here they are. And the audience just agrees, oh, they're terrible, they sucked, this is awful, and they boo. I don't think it was intended to be like an anti-Christian thing, but it is kind of funny that they finish this song from Godspell, and then the cross lights up, and then an audience that the narrative is already established is predominantly Jewish all just start fucking booing. Because like, wouldn't you? I don't know. Like, wouldn't you just be like, boo, fuck it, this is a Jewish camp, you fuckers? I mean, I don't know that it's Camp Firewood, not Camp Elijah or something like that, or like, the demographic is intended to be predominantly Jewish, even to the degree that Cooper's character is Jewish, and earlier he called his parents to brag about getting a girlfriend when he thought Katie was going to go out with him. Calls his parents, and you don't hear the parents' side of the conversation, but he says, yeah, I guess her nose is kind of big, like she could be. Obviously they were asking if she's Jewish. He's like, well, she's got kind of a big nose. Again, terribly offensive if a Christian person made that. Like, if a non-Jew made this movie and was like, oh yeah, her nose is kind of big, like, that's a stereotype that would piss most people off if my Catholic ass wrote that. But if all your filmmakers are Jewish, then you can write that in. And again, some more period appropriate music. It's fucking badass. And Cooper's just doing a Gene impression, right? He's just doing an impression of David Maloney's character of Gene. And it works. Like, Katie's just, she's looking at him in a way that she has not this entire film. You get the sense that maybe when she kissed him earlier, she was like, he was nice and she sort of felt sorry for him and she was a little confused. But mostly, like, she's not smitten with him. Here, she's actually looking at him like, oh my God, like, this is a fucking man in front of me. Like, look at this fucking dude. But he's just doing a Gene impression. Like, yeah, like, even down to the way he talks, that kind of like breath. He's sort of like, yeah, I'm getting out of here. It's the last night of camp. Of course you're getting out of there. Everybody's getting out of there tomorrow. You're just going to leave 12 hours early or whatever at 8 p.m. instead of 8 a.m. And so, a big question at the end of this film is meant to be like, did this guy, that's his brother, it's supposed to be his brother, his character saying really mean, and then he laughs. He's like, yeah. So, what's his talent? He's been playing around with a chicken and acting like a weirdo and sort of talking like a robot for the whole movie. And then he just starts doing like something here at the end. And we get, of course, we get this effect. They start sort of cutting it a little bit more frequently here. We get a little bit more frequent cuts. We get some odd camera angles with the camera being positioned in different spots. And that's meant to, sort of get us a little disoriented to the space. Of course, the wind is blowing and it's supposed to create this like what is he actually doing? And absurdly, she pulls the flannel from the earlier scene out of this tiny box that looks like it could hold a bracelet. She pulls this whole flannel out. And it's a practical effect, of course, because it's like there's a reason why it's sitting next to her when she opens it, so she could pull the flannel through the bench off screen, off camera. And so we don't see any of that wind outside yet, right? It's like the tree behind them. If you pay attention, like, the whole inside is shaking and there's wind. People's hair is blowing. Gene's about to get blown over. People are actually start to get like bowled over. Clothing blowing around. Andy thinks it's fun. But when you see the outdoors, when Katie was telling Cooper that she loves him or whatever, it's not like that's going to last either. She's a teenager, and that's very much part of the intention behind her character. It's like, yeah, she's a teenager. But here we see nothing's moving outside, right? So the question we have to ask ourselves is, did that kid get up on stage and cause this weird gust of air, this weird semi-earthquake? He blows the doors off the building. Does he cause this weird, I don't know, this weird atmospheric event with wind or air pressure or something that diverts Skylab? Or is it this strange contraption that they came up with that diverts Skylab and prevents it from landing on the gathering hall? Because it lands nearby, obviously, as we see from this shot. Was it him, or was it the nerdy kids with the weird R2D2 with donuts looking device? And open question for us to all wonder. Also, as absurd as this film is, don't wonder, don't bother. Because if you want to believe that it was the kid and he used some weird psychic power that like created this atmospheric disturbance that sort of shifted Skylab over and allowed it to drop some yards away, or if you want to believe that it was the weird cobbled together device that was made out of Oscar the Grouch's house, then you're free to believe that too. There's really no indication by the filmmakers given. Andy gets his comeuppance here when she doesn't want to kiss him either. He dumped her earlier, said she tasted like a burger. I don't like you anymore. If you ever break up with a girl and you tell her that she tastes like a burger and you don't like her anymore, if you can somehow verify that and prove it to me, I will send you a check for $5,000. It has to be a real breakup, though. You have to actually dump someone by telling them they taste like a burger and you don't like them anymore. And I'll Venmo you $5,000 for your service to humanity. So, the night ends. That was our happy ending. Turn it off here if you like happy endings. Because Coop got the girl. David Hyde Pierce and Beth, their characters, they get together. That's good, right? We have the union of these couples that gave us this little bit of through line to the film. It's going to unravel a little bit here today. I like how he wins the award, the Johns Hopkins Award or whatever. It's a prestigious award. You wouldn't have won that overnight. Obviously, it's stupid. And then also the trophy is looks like it came from Goodwill, which is great. Just hands it off to someone off screen. Again, you need to get it out of his hands so he can put his hands, so that you can block this scene with him and Beth where they can be a little bit more intimate. And it doesn't work if he's holding a trophy. So he's got to set it down or do something with it. He literally hands it to like a production assistant off screen. And that's not breaking the fourth wall, but it's a very direct acknowledgement that he's an actor acting in a film, and there are people just outside of the frame that he can just hand the trophy to. And so again, it's sort of, undermines a little bit the film language that we're kind of used to. We're like used to these things having this sort of internally consistent diegesis and not breaking the diegesis. Of course, Molly Shannon's character is running away with the 12-year-old or 11-year-old that gave her therapy. Gene's leaving. He has an attractive wife and a convertible. I mean, it really seems like Gene has like a successful kind of life. Why he was such a fuck up before is kind of a mystery. But he owes it all to the can of vegetables, which bows. But again, is that a subjective? Are we just kind of seeing things through Gene's eyes in that moment when the can sort of nods to him? Or is that objectively, is that really a living can? Not living and breathing, because cans don't breathe, right? There's no lungs. But is it alive in some way, like objectively? I don't tend to think it is. I tend to think that the can of talking vegetables, or the talking can of vegetables, is it's a figment of Gene's troubled psyche, because there's really no other elements of like paranormal or science fiction or anything like that. Although they do try to explain it in the first day of camp, and they do make it objective. In the first day of camp, they answer that question. Is this a subjective thing that Gene is imagining, or is it really a talking can of vegetables? They make it clear that it's really a talking can of vegetables, because that's more absurd than explaining that it's just Gene's um, psyche. Now she's dumping him. He's not Super Coop anymore. He's not like this. He's not doing his Gene impression anymore. So she has this realization, like she's completely aware of what a douchebag Andy is. Before that, you got the idea that maybe Andy was taking advantage of her, that she wasn't aware of Andy's shortcomings, that he cheated on her or whatever. But here she reveals, like, I don't care that he's lame. I don't care that he's a douche, that he treats me poorly. I don't even care that he cheats on me. I just want to continue to have sex with him. So her sentiment reflects Andy's sentiment from earlier, where he's like, I'm not going to give up Katie. I'm not going to break up with Katie to do the right thing. I want to keep having sex with her because she's hot. They don't care about each other. She basically, in this scene, breaking up with Coop, she lowers herself to Andy's level. She really just says, I am as shallow as Andy is. And whatever you saw in me, forget it. It doesn't exist. It's as it's as figmentary as the can of talking vegetables is. And it's meaningless. Much like with Victor Pulak trying to get back to the Abby character, because she sort of promised him sex before he left, but then she proceeds to bone everybody, and it's obvious that whatever he built up in his mind, he had a poor approximation, he had a poor mental image of her. And so here we get Beth and Coop as kind of the two dual main protagonists. They sort of embrace and walk off after everyone else has left. That's sort of how you identify a protagonist, right? That's like film language telling us that, like, they're the main characters. Here's a song written, Wet Hot American Summer, written for the film by Craig Wedren. I have the album. This is the vinyl. I have the vinyl right here, and I also have all of the whole soundtrack on digital too. And because I love you guys, I'm gonna upload that, like I did with Grandma's Boy, with the Grandma's Boy soundtrack. I'm gonna put all the MP3s. I'll just upload them as attachments on Patreon for my patrons, because I fucking love you guys. I'll put the digital, the MP3s up as an attachment to this post on my Patreon, because you guys are the shit, and I love you guys. So the soundtrack, unfortunately, this is the soundtrack, the vinyl album that I got. I found this it was on clearance at like a Barnes and Noble for like $10. I said, fuck it, for $10, I'll get it. Unfortunately, it doesn't have Jane, and it doesn't have Love Is All Right Tonight. So some of the actual pop rock that they play in this film, unfortunately, did not make it. And I'm guessing it was for licensing reasons, like the cost, didn't make its way to the official soundtrack. But all of the music, the score that was actually written for this, I mean, it's insanely recognizable. The music in this film is quite good. And this original song, of course, are on there. So all the original music is on there. Unfortunately, they did not get licensing for some of the other tracks, which I thought was really a shame, because it would have been nice to have those sort of spread amongst the original score as well, because they really do kind of bring, I mean, I guess they're not exclusive to this film. So like Jane doesn't always remind people of Wet Hot American Summer, because it's a song that's been out for 43 years or 44 years, or whatever the fuck. So it's not as associated with this film as like the original music would be. But nonetheless, it's a good album, and I'll throw it up there for you guys. I think, again, it's a great place to leave you. Although we do have this post-credit stinger, so I'm going to hang out actually until the post-credit stinger. And I think Marvel, one of the lasting cultural contributions that Marvel, the MCU, has had, one of the real positives has been that they really popularized the post-credit stinger. That's what it's called. It's a little post-credit scene where, you sit through all of this business, all of the credits, you sit through it, and you get a little bit more like in film. Usually it's part of the diegesis. Sometimes it's meta. Of course, the MCU did not invent the post-credit stinger, because this film predates the MCU by 7 years, and it has a post-credit stinger. And Ferris Bueller's Day Off from the mid-'80s, I think 85, 86, that film has a post-credit stinger. So the post-credit stinger was not invented by Marvel, but they used it so much throughout all of their films that the broad audience that is now, accustomed to the post-credit stinger, people are much more willing to sit through the credits and wait to see if there's anything there, which I have to appreciate because um, in films like this and Ferris Bueller, it pays off, right? It feels like it's obviously just a reference to something that happened early in the film. The kid got sent home from camp on the last day, which is again weird. His parents had to come get him like 24 hours early because he got caught masturbating while recording a video in the AV room or whatever. Like none of the radio equipment is hooked up, none of the radio equipment works, but there's a video camera in 1981. I don't know, Betamax. I mean, it's not DV, and he films himself masturbating. And here's the scene 10 years later. So this is 91. You get to hear Jane again. I love it. And all these characters, they've agreed to meet again 10 years later. And they even agreed to meet at 9:30 and make it your beeswax to be there at 9:30.
I thought we said 9:30.
No, we said 9 so we could be here by 9:30.
So really stupid. Apparently they were all getting together to watch the video of the kid masturbating. And there they were actually playing their age. So, that was all good in the hood. I hope I've said everything I meant to say about that film. Again, it's just a incredible film in my opinion. It's hard to say why it's such an incredible film. It's not film art in the way that, something like Blade Runner is film art. It's not cutting edge technologically. It has kind of this consistent artistic vision. So I'll give them that. They did a really good job of kind of creating this small microcosm like camp. Isn't that how it feels anyway? Like when you're at camp, particularly the years that I went to camp and folks who are my age and older went to camp, like you didn't have cell phones. You weren't taking your cell phone to camp. There weren't laptops. That wasn't even an option. I think a lot of camps, even nowadays, they don't allow the technology, which I agree with. I'm going to sound like an old man shaking his fist at the clouds, but I think that's what camp is for. Like you're supposed to disconnect a little bit. You're supposed to be in the fucking woods, kind of sequestered from the rest of the world. And you're with this group of people, which relatively speaking is kind of small. And you're all just kind of out there in the woods, fucking archery and hiking and fucking swimming and maybe like being thrown to your death in the woods out of a moving van. But the idea is that like camp, I think, is supposed to feel like this little microcosm of the world. These are people that you really only see there at camp. They're not necessarily the people that you would see, every day at school, every week at school, whatever. These are people that you probably only see once a year at camp. And, you forge these close bonds because you're there together every day for weeks. But, once you leave, it's like you're kind of back to the real world, back to life. And like, especially in the day of no cell phones, no laptops, no social media, it's like, how are you going to keep touch with any of these fuckers? Like, yeah, you might have a phone number, a landline, and you can call them. Like you can meet up somewhere. Maybe, they live an hour this way and you live an hour that way. Maybe you could meet up in the middle and go see a movie. But, the idea is that it's supposed to feel like this tiny microcosm. And with the exception of the mid-film jaunt to town, the closest town, that even feels realistic to me. I remember being like an older camp volunteer and like you'd take a trip into town to get some stuff that you needed. Like as an older person, it was okay for you to bring like a 12-pack of Diet Coke and, maybe like some other like snacks and stuff that weren't part of the official menu and like stash those away in your cabin or whatever, or your bunk. You had a car. You could just jump in and go to town, one evening that you didn't have anything else going on. So, even that felt pretty realistic, but it did feel like this tiny, like this little microcosm of this small, but because it wasn't overarching, they didn't have to, they really only had to give you like snippets of the culture of that time with things like the wardrobe and the music. And that was like all they really needed to do to convince you. And so I think there's like artistic merit in the idea that they like created this really stupid and absurd and completely unrealistic world, but it still sort of like felt like inhabited by these people because they were all so like straight faced about it. They were all so credulous about the whole thing. There was never a point where one of the characters looks at the camera and breaks the fourth wall and just kind of raises his eyebrow. I think there's a moment at the end where kind of Cooper sort of almost looks at the camera when Margaret Moreau's character's talking to him and dumping him, and he kind of looks at the camera like, this bitch, like, what the fuck, she's just as shallow as Andy. He's having his realization that she's a teenage girl as well, and she's really just all about the sex too. Like, she doesn't give a fuck. And there's a part where he almost looks at the camera and gives this kind of knowing nod to the camera, but not quite. So nobody ever really breaks the fourth wall and looks and like, yeah, I think this is as dumb as you do. The fact that Victor Pulak takes a minute to jump over a bale of hay and the guy on the motorcycle can't just go around it. I mean, yeah, it's all very stupid. But I don't know. They just play it so straight. Like, of course, there's this one bale of hay dead center in the middle of the road, and the guy running can't go over. He's like, what do I do? What do I do? As soon as he hits this impediment, he can't deal with it organically and just leap over it or go around it. And same thing with the guy on the motorcycle. So they just take it all so seriously. Like, you have to take it as an audience for granted that it's true. So I think, there's artistic merit in that. And again, I think that there's a lot to be said for a film that's enjoyable. The ride is enjoyable. And the ending doesn't have to be a revelation, and things don't have to gel perfectly. Even though I think the ending was great, everyone just kind of dispersed, went their own ways. There's a little garbage left over and plenty of tracks, and like everybody had their journey, Victor and Jean, and it's also stupid, but there's like this little twinge of like he's thanking the can of vegetables, and then he's getting his convertible and speeding off, and it's like, I don't know, it's so stupid, but also like it is a little heartfelt. And even though it's a can of vegetables, you I don't know, I still get that emotion. Like it resonates in a way that as absurd as it is, still kind of feels real. There's like some real nostalgia beneath this veneer of this. It's a deep veneer of absurdity. So I don't know. It's just me trying to put into English like what makes this movie good, like why people should regard this as like a good film, like actual piece of art, of cinema, where this could just be a film that you like to watch when you get high. Like, this could just be one of the movies that's in the rotation with 50-Year-Old Virgin or 40-Year-Old Virgin and Cheech and Chong movies and Grandma's Boy, and you just have a rotation of dumb comedy movies that you watch when you've turned your own brain off thanks to alcohol and drugs. I understand, because I have a short list of films like that too, right? A couple of beers and an edible, and there's just stuff you like to watch. And it's not Citizen Kane. It's not The Godfather Part 2. I'm not eating edibles and watching The Godfather Part 2. It's just not part of it's not anything that I'm interested in doing. So, if you're the type of person that to you, Wet Hot American Summer is that stoner comedy. It's not really a stoner comedy, right? It's not a stoner comedy in the sense that Grandma's Boy is, because all of the characters are smoking pot with you. But it certainly is the type of film that people could just like drink a few and watch. And that's fine if that's how you like to do it. But I did want to try during this commentary to sort of put to words why I think that this film might be a little bit more important than just being like, this is something that we get fucked up when we watch when it's August. I think there's something to it. I mean, I think there's something artistic to it. Again, it may not stand up with the classic works of cinema. I mean, it's not a French New Wave film by Francois Truffaut. I mean, it's not a Jean Renoir film. I mean, it's not even a Woody Allen. But I think, if we're going to talk about American comedies that do merit some artistic credibility, I think this belongs there. And I'm going to continue to try and develop that thought and my argument for why this film deserves praise and recognition. And I think that Rotten Tomatoes got it significantly wrong. This is a film that I think was ranked or is ranked currently at 33% on Rotten Tomatoes, and they got it wrong. Period. That is incorrect. That is a travesty. And I do believe that critics have tried to like correct themselves a little bit. I think they gave the Netflix series, the two Netflix series, reviews in the 90s. So I think the critics score of First Day of Camp is somewhere in the 90s, 93, something like that, 94. And then 10 years later is like 91%. So it's a matter of critics
knowing that back in 2001, they fucked up. They got it wrong. Change your tone, right? Go back and correct yourself. There's nothing wrong with coming out and saying, in 2001, I was wrong. And I'd like to change my tone today because I think I've got it right now. Versus just sticking to your guns and saying, yeah, 20 years ago it sucked and it still sucks today. And I'm going to stand by that because I could never be wrong. No, everybody's wrong at some point. I'm not wrong about Wet Hot American Summer. And I think the critics were. I think it definitely was. I think this film was way better than 10 Years Later or First Day of Camp. The two Netflix limited series don't deserve to be in the 90s while this is in the 30s. It should be maybe the other way around. This should be in the 90s. This should be a 95% Rotten Tomatoes score. And First Day of Camp and 10 Years Later should be, I don't know, 70s, 80, something like that. Anyway, thank you very much for hanging out and watching the film with me. Thank you very much for being a member of the Patreon. If you happen to see this on YouTube, if I publish this to YouTube for the general audience, you're not a member of the Patreon, there's a chance I might do that in the future. So if you come across this on YouTube, please join the Patreon. Patreon.com/teamalme. You can watch this commentary without any covering over the video. So like no blocking your sight, your line of sight at all. We can just watch the movie together because Patreon respects fair use. And so please go become a Patreon if you haven't already. If you are, I love you. You people are wonderful people. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your evening, whenever you're watching this. I don't know, some year in the future. Maybe this is some weird, 10 years later you're watching this. I don't know. Hopefully not, but I hope you've enjoyed the film. We're going to do this again soon. I think the next time we're going to do this is we're going to do Back to School. Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield for the Back to School season, which is going to start very soon. I think early September is a perfect time to do Back to School. Anyway, cheers, guys. Have a great evening. Love you very much if you're a patron. If not, I don't. Unless you become a patron, then I will. Love you very much. Peace, y'all. Deuces.